Hyannis was a small, peaceful town where time seemed to slow, and every corner held a whisper of calm routine. But in one quiet house near the edge of town, calm had given way to something far heavier. 5-year-old Emma lived there with her aging grandparents ever since her world had shattered. Her parents, renowned dog trainers known throughout the region, had died suddenly in a tragic accident. Since that day, Emma hadn't spoken a single word. The once bright, curious little girl had retreated into silence, her eyes hollow, her small hands clinging tightly to the memory of what she'd lost. Only 6 German shepherds, the very dogs her parents had lovingly trained, remained steadfast by her side. They were more than pets. They were her only comfort, silently guarding the fragile heart of a girl drowning in grief. Before the accident, Emma's days had been filled with laughter and energy. Her parents, James and Caroline, had dedicated their lives to training service dogs, and Emma had grown up surrounded by the sound of barking, the steady rhythm of commands, and the gentle love that radiated from her family. But all of that vanished in a single cruel moment. The crash had left no survivors, and overnight, Emma's home became a hollow shell. The once vibrant little girl stopped speaking altogether. No words, no cries, just an unsettling stillness that seemed far too heavy for someone so young. Her grandparents, Margaret and Walter, did everything they could to fill the void, but age and grief weighed on them too. They tried to comfort Emma, but her distant gaze never shifted. Her small voice never returned. The only beings who seemed to reach her were the 6 German shepherds her parents had trained so carefully. Each of them sensed Emma's sorrow in their own way. They lay beside her bed at night, followed her silently through the house, rested their heads on her lap when she sat unmoving by the window. They never demanded. They only stayed, watching, waiting, offering quiet company to a girl who felt completely alone. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Yet no matter how much time passed, Emma remained locked away in her grief. The world outside kept moving, but inside that house in Hyannis, everything stood still for Emma. The 6 dogs weren't just a memory of her parents. They were her lifeline, the only thread, connecting her to the world she had lost. Every morning before the sun fully rose over Hyannis, the same scene would quietly unfold in the small house at the end of the street. While Margaret and Walter moved about the kitchen preparing simple breakfasts, 6 pairs of attentive eyes would already be stationed outside Emma's door. The German shepherds seemed to understand something no one else could. They didn't bark, didn't scratch at the door impatiently. Instead, they waited calm, steady, and loyal. Sometimes Emma would crack the door open just enough to see them sitting there, tails gently swaying. Their presence was a silent invitation, a reminder that she wasn't truly alone. Slowly, she began to sit beside them. She wouldn't speak, but she'd rest her small hand on their heads, feeling the warmth of their fur beneath her fingertips. Each dog had their own way of comforting her. Max, the eldest, would press his head firmly against her shoulder, while Luna would nudge her gently with her nose until Emma finally gave the faintest smile. They never rushed her, never asked for anything more than her company. The house felt lighter during those brief moments. Emma's grandparents noticed the subtle changes. The way she seemed to breathe a little easier when the dogs surrounded her. The way her eyes softened when they curled up at her feet. For Emma, the dogs were her constant. They reminded her of her parents without words or pictures. Every trick, every obedient gesture carried echoes of her parents' voices. But more importantly, the dogs offered something that even her loving grandparents couldn't fully provide: unwavering, wordless loyalty. Day after day, they stood by her, their quiet companionship wrapping around her like a protective shield, patiently waiting for the little girl they loved to find her way back to herself. Margaret and Walter had always done their best to hold everything together. Though their bodies were slower now and their hands often trembled from age, they poured every ounce of strength into creating a safe, stable home for Emma. But behind closed doors, reality pressed harder each day. Bills piled up on the kitchen table. Veterinary costs, food expenses, utilities, and their savings dwindled faster than they could replenish it. The 6 German shepherds, as loyal and beloved as they were, required more care than their limited income could sustain. Late at night, after Emma had gone to bed, the old couple would sit quietly at the worn dining table. the silence between them heavy with unspoken worry, heavier than words. Walter would shake his head, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Margaret's hands would clutch her teacup tightly, her heart breaking at the thought of what they would have to tell Emma. One cold morning, they finally gathered the courage to speak. Emma sat at the window, one of the dogs resting its chin on her knee. Walter knelt beside her, his voice soft but strained. "Sweetheart, we've tried everything, but we might have to find new homes for the dogs." For a moment, Emma didn't react. Her small hand froze mid-stroke against Max's fur. Then, without a word, she stood up, walked past her grandparents, and disappeared into her room, closing the door quietly behind her. Inside, she curled up beneath her covers, her back turned to the world. Meals went untouched. She didn't emerge, not even when the dogs gently pawed at her door. Outside her room, the 6 German shepherds seemed restless. They paced the hallway, noses pressed against the door, ears twitching, as if they understood every word spoken earlier. They didn't bark or whine, but their usual calm had shifted into something tense, uncertain. Max, the leader, would pause by the door longer than the others, his gaze steady, as though he knew exactly what was happening. Yet whenever Emma cracked the door open, even slightly, they greeted her with the same quiet strength, tails wagging gently, eyes soft, nudging her hand in encouragement, though something deep within them sensed they might not have many days left by her side. None of them showed weakness. Instead, they stood firm, refusing to let their sorrow show, determined to lift Emma back up, if only for a little while longer. Days passed in silence. After Emma heard the news, she barely moved from her room, her small figure curled tightly under the covers as though trying to disappear. Her grandparents knocked gently, leaving food by the door, but nothing seemed to reach her. The 6 German shepherds, however, refused to give up. Each morning, they would gather outside Emma's door, sitting patiently, waiting. Then, one by one, they began bringing her their leashes, gently nudging them against the door, their eyes filled with quiet insistence. At first, Emma didn't respond. But something about their persistence, their unwavering loyalty, stirred something deep inside her one morning. She finally opened the door. Max stood there, leash in his mouth, tail swishing slowly, eyes locked on hers. Without speaking, Emma reached down, her small fingers brushing against his head. She took the leash, then clipped it onto Max's collar. One by one, she did the same for each of the dogs, her hands steady despite the tightness in her chest. Margaret and Walter watched from the doorway, unsure what to say, their hearts aching yet hopeful, as Emma quietly led the dogs outside. For the first time in days, the park was quiet that morning, dew still glistening on the grass as Emma walked. All 6 dogs stayed perfectly in sync with her, moving with practiced ease. Passers-by paused, whispering in amazement. It wasn't every day they saw a tiny 5-year-old girl calmly leading 6 large, powerful dogs as though they were one. Some people smiled, others stared, but Emma hardly noticed. For the first time in what felt like forever, she breathed in the crisp air, felt the tug of the leashes in her hands, and sensed the steady rhythm of the dogs walking beside her. With each step, something heavy inside her began to lift, not entirely, but just enough. The dogs didn't look back. They walked confidently, as if saying, "We're still here. You're not alone." The morning air carried a soft chill as Emma and the dogs strolled deeper into the park. Though she still didn't speak, there was a quiet calm about her now, the gentle rhythm of 6 leashes in her hands, the steady presence of her loyal companions beside her. Everything seemed ordinary until Max suddenly froze, his ears perked up, body rigid, eyes laser-focused toward the lake at the park's edge. The other dogs sensed it too, their heads turning in unison, alert but silent. Emma followed their gaze, and that's when she saw it. A small child no older than 4 had slipped from the grassy bank and tumbled into the water. There was no one nearby paying attention, no parents in sight. The child flailed briefly, then disappeared beneath the surface. Without hesitation, Max bolted forward, leash slipping from Emma's hand. The others followed immediately, as if an invisible command had been given. What happened next unfolded so quickly yet so perfectly, it left the bystanders speechless. Max reached the water first, plunging in without a second thought. Right behind him, Luna and Rex flanked him on either side, their powerful bodies cutting through the water with practiced ease. On the bank, the remaining 3 dogs spread out, barking sharply, drawing attention, signaling for help. Under the surface, Max reached the child, gripping gently onto the back of the toddler's shirt without hurting him. Luna swam alongside, keeping the child balanced, while Rex stayed just behind, nudging them toward the shore. The entire sequence felt almost choreographed, each dog knowing exactly what role to play. Years of careful training by Emma's parents had shaped them into more than pets. They were a team, intelligent, disciplined, ready for any situation. Gasps filled the park as the dogs reached the shallow edge, carefully pulling the child onto solid ground. Within moments, parkgoers rushed over, one woman grabbing her phone to call for help, another kneeling beside the crying but safe toddler. Emma stood frozen, heart pounding, watching her dogs return to her, wet, shivering but calm as ever. Someone nearby whispered in awe, "Those dogs, they knew exactly what to do." Another murmured, "I've never seen anything like it." In that moment, everyone understood these weren't just ordinary dogs. They were heroes. For a few breathless seconds, no one moved. Parents clutched their children closer. Strangers stared in stunned silence, witnessing something extraordinary. And by the afternoon, the entire town was buzzing. Someone at the park had captured the entire rescue on video. A tiny girl calmly leading 6 powerful dogs, and then, without hesitation, those same dogs springing into action to save a child's life. It didn't take long for the video to spread. First, it appeared on local news stations. Then it was shared across social media, viewed thousands, then millions of times. People everywhere were stunned, not just by the dogs' bravery, but by their discipline. Teamwork comments flooded in, praising the intelligence of the German shepherds and the incredible composure of the little girl walking them. But soon, as more details emerged, admiration turned into something deeper. Reporters dug into the story and learned about Emma, the 5-year-old girl who hadn't spoken since losing her parents, who now faced the heartbreak of possibly losing the only family she had left. Her 6 dogs. Photos of Emma, quiet and small, standing between the tall, protective figures of Max, Luna, Rex, and the others touched hearts across the country. People couldn't believe that after everything, she might be forced to give them up because of financial hardship. Messages poured in. Donations trickled, then flooded, from strangers moved by the bond between Emma and her dogs. Parents, dog lovers, even organizations stepped forward, offering assistance to ensure Emma would never have a part with her loyal companions. It wasn't just sympathy. It was a shared determination to protect the bond between the little girl and her dogs. Margaret and Walter were overwhelmed by the outpouring of kindness. They had spent so many sleepless nights worrying, burdened by what felt like an impossible choice. Now, neighbors knocked on their door offering groceries. Others offered help with vet bills, and local businesses pitched in quietly. For Emma, though she still hadn't found her voice, something inside her shifted. She could feel it, the weight beginning to lift, not only because of her dogs, but because people cared. The days following the rescue felt like something out of a dream. Everywhere they went, people recognized Emma and the 6 German shepherds. Neighbors stopped by daily, bringing treats for the dogs or toys and clothes for Emma. Donations continued pouring in, more than enough to cover the cost of keeping the dogs well-fed and healthy. The weight that had hung so heavily over Margaret and Walter seemed to melt away overnight. But the greatest change happened quietly inside Emma. One afternoon, after the house had finally settled into a peaceful rhythm again, Emma sat cross-legged on the living room floor. The 6 dogs gathered around her, each lying patiently at her feet. For a long moment, she simply stared at them, her fingers running absently through Max's fur. Her grandparents watched from the doorway, hearts filled with cautious hope. And then something incredible happened. There was only silence, the kind that wraps around a room like a hell breath. Emma's lips parted, and in the softest, almost uncertain voice, she whispered, "Max." The room seemed to freeze. Max immediately perked up, ears twitching, his gaze fixed intently on her. Beside him, Luna gave a small bark, as if encouraging her. Emma swallowed, then said it again, stronger this time. Max, Luna, Rex, she continued, her voice trembling but determined, calling each dog's name one by one. As she spoke, the dogs reacted instantly, tails wagging, eyes bright, moving closer to nuzzle against her. It was as if they understood the enormity of that moment. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. Walter turned away briefly, pretending to wipe something from his face. For the first time since losing her parents, Emma's voice filled the room, not out of fear or sorrow, but love. The dogs, sensing the shift, circled her protectively, some licking her face, others pressing their bodies closer, as if to say, "We're still here. We're not going anywhere." In that moment, surrounded by her loyal companions and the warmth of community that refused to let her fall, Emma smiled, a real, unguarded smile. And the house that once felt so empty finally felt like home again. And just like that, Emma's quiet world was filled once more with love, loyalty, and the voices she thought she'd lost forever.